Hello and welcome to today's webinar, The Definitive Guide to AI Transformation, Building the Superworker Organization. Thank you to our sponsors of today's event, Eightfold. Eightfold's AI interviewer agent is transforming how organizations hire. Powered by Eightfold's Talent Intelligence Foundation, the AI interviewer is an autonomous and assistant agentic interviewer that thinks, adapts, and evaluates like your best recruiter, operating 24/7 across time zones and languages while assessing every candidate fairly and consistently. It works across the entire interview process from initial screening to final assessment, enabling teams to make faster hiring decisions, deliver a seamless candidate experience, and complete interviews in under a business week so you can find your best fit talent. Now, I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. If you have any questions or technical concerns, please use the Q&A module on your screen. You can resize and minimize the different modules on your screen by using the options in the top right corner of each module. Attendees will receive the recording of today's event. Look for that email within 24 hours post-event. We encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A module throughout the event for our speakers to address, while general comments will go into the attendee chat. You can also use the reaction module in the menu at the bottom to relay items you may like or want to express an emotion to. And now I will pass the stage to Josh Bersin, CEO and Global Analyst, the Josh Bersin Company.
Thank you and welcome everybody. Kathy and I are going to talk about what we call the Superworker era, of course, all about AI, which is the #1 topic on everybody's mind. And I'm going to give you a little overview, and then Kathy's going to share with you some comprehensive research we've done on the pacesetters, the companies that are driving the most success in this early days of AI transformation across their companies. So the theory and the concept of the superworker is that AI is making everybody more successful, everybody more powerful, everybody more productive. If you look at the job market in the United States, it's questionable whether we've created any jobs at all during the entire year. And the layoffs are coming. I mean, I just saw the Amazon announcement today, and then there was another one this morning. And that's not because companies are seeing economic slowdown, because the economy is actually doing reasonably well. It's really because they're forecasting and projecting the technology to reduce the demand for people over time. And that, of course, happens only when you as an organization redesign the company to use the AI in a way that you can produce more output with the same number of people. Now, this is not as simple as giving everybody a copy of Galileo or the Copilot and telling them to go hither and do your thing in a more productive way, because what happens with these AI systems, as I'll show you, is they start to revolutionize the business processes as a whole. The problem, of course, in all of that is that the employees in many companies are not ready for this. The transformational efforts are new. The technologies are changing almost every day, and the vendor market is very confusing. So this re-engineering process is about a year in here, but not in any way complete. And employees are worried. And so let's just talk a little bit about that. And before we give you this best practices. Now, interestingly enough, two things I want to mention to you about the sort of maybe over optimism about AI. This is a study that was done earlier this year that essentially shows that 95% of the people that have purchased AI products don't know if they're generating an ROI yet. And, you know, the conclusion that the MIT people made, which is the same conclusion that we're coming to as well, is that it's not a matter of the technology not doing what it's advertised, but it's also the organizational gap of people learning how to use it and deciding on the use cases and the re-engineering processes that need to take place. The second thing I want to mention, which is not on this slide, is a study that came out over the weekend, which I wrote about on our website from the BBC, which shows that 45% of the queries that that in OpenAI, Gemini, Perplexity, and Microsoft Copilot and Anthropic, 45% of the queries came back with incorrect answers when querying for news. So these are not perfect systems. They are probabilistic systems. Any small amount of error in the data could result in a large amount of incorrect answers because the data is all integrated through these large vectors. So this stuff is not exactly simple to use. And if you read all these articles about superintelligence and about AI being 100 times more intelligent than humans, I would question that where we are today, because we're going to have to learn how to use it for what it's good at, and be careful not to use it for things that it could cause risk. There's a lot of opportunities for AI all over companies. I'm just highlighting a few statistics that have been out there from many, many different consultants, including us. The right side is mostly stuff from us. The left side's from other places. So the challenge that you have as an organization is, where do you focus? And as Kathy's going to share with you, we can give you some advice on that. Cost cutting is one approach, but there's a better place to focus, usually to focus on customer experience and revenue growth. And, I won't bother belaboring the job market data because it'll come out every couple of, weeks. There'll be more data. But if you read the articles that have come out just the last week or two, there's more and more reflection of this, that companies have decided that because they're spending a lot of money on these new tools, they're not going to hire people. And that, in a sense, forces re-engineering simply from fewer number of people available to hire. There's also this potential issue where CEOs can, and sometimes do, use this as an excuse to lay off people when actually they probably overhired in the first place. And I think Salesforce is an example of a company that's gone through this many times, where it's a very well-run company, but they buy a lot of companies, and when they do, they end up with too many people. So, we're not seeing, I would say in my experience, and Kathy and I were just in Europe with a whole bunch of companies this last week, I'm not seeing a lot of companies coming up with breakthrough productivity improvements yet, but there's a lot of good stuff going on, and it is coming in many places. That's the idea of the superworker. The other idea of a superworker is that in order for Superman to do good things for society, if you read the Superman comics, he needs to know what to do and what not to do. When he was a young boy and he first landed on Earth, he broke a lot of things too because of his powers, which is exactly the same situation in here, where these AI tools have the potential to do great things, but also the potential to do dangerous things. So our jobs as HR people or business people is to put the guardrails and the training and the systems in place so that employees can use these systems for effective transformation, and not hire the wrong people or make bad decisions or incorrectly assess data, or possibly, incorrectly make decisions on other more critical things like safety or other tools. So, there's a lot of re-engineering going on. We have this model that's worked very, very well for people to sort of think through this re-engineering process, and I'll just touch on it and then let Kathy walk you through some examples. Generally, the way this works is, the first thing that happens is you use Copilot or ChatGPT or Galileo or whatever you have, and you find that there's things about your job that are easier to do. Writing, reading, assessing data. For example, I like to put spreadsheets into the Galileo and let Galileo do the pivot tables and stuff for me instead of doing it by hand. It's just faster. But that doesn't change my job. It just makes my job a little bit quicker. I'm doing the same work. And then what happens is, at step 2, you reach the point where you've done enough of this that you have your own little tricks or automation tools, if you're a software engineer, for example, and you know how to use this thing on a regular basis. And you might get a 30% automation improvement. You might save a day a week if you're in a very routine job with a lot of manual labor. But that only takes you so far. The next thing that happens is you say, look, if I'm automating the stuff I'm doing, maybe I'm a recruiter, and the person right after me is doing the interviewing scheduling, and then the person after them is doing the interviewing, and then the person after them is creating the offer letters. What if we did this as one big process and let the AI do all 4 of those things? And at level 3, where the big improvements happen, is where you re-engineer the workflow. And I think a lot of you are going to be doing much more of that over time as the agents become more sophisticated, more packaged. And then what happens is the agents become smarter and they can use data to optimize the process. Many, many examples of this in recruiting. Those of you that are in the talent acquisition side of your company, or you've done a lot of recruiting, or you're in HR, there are dozens of steps to recruiting. Even the simple step of opening up a rec where you talk to a hiring manager to get a sense of what the job is, AI can do that. AI can interview the whole team and come back with a set of requirements for this job, not just based on the manager's opinion, but based on the opinions of the whole team. There's things that can be done all the way from the very beginning, all the way through the process to selecting, hiring, handling the candidate experience, and so forth. And the reason that we like to show recruiting is this is where the HR market is the most mature. Products like Paradox, Mackie People, Eightfold, the sponsor of this webinar, can do all of this. So we have examples in HR where we can replace an entire process now with a series of AI agents. Ultimately, the way this is going to work, and I think you're beginning to see this in the press now, is your company, whatever it may be, is going to find its own productivity improvement curve relative to your peers or competitors. And to some degree, if you lag behind or maybe delay your implementation of AI, you might find a competitor doing something faster and better than you can without you even knowing that it happened. I'll give you an example. In our company, we do a lot of research and we publish things and we write articles and do podcasts and give speeches and share information and data. Up until 2 years ago, we had a very traditional publishing model. We had a publishing group that did a lot of that editing and publishing and document generation. We now take all of our IP and we put it into our AI called Galileo, which means that all of our customers, more than 5,000 people now using Galileo, can get access to the research we do instantaneously when we produce it. The day it's produced, it goes into Galileo. The next day, everybody has it. And not only can they read it, they can ask it questions and they can analyze their own situation relative to what research we've discovered. That for us gave us maybe an order of magnitude improvement in speed. If we were still doing it the old way, it would be taking weeks and months. Same thing happens with our training. So you can do that in your company. Learning and development, for example, it's possible to generate content directly from documents in days in multiple languages as opposed to months. And these things are going to talk to each other. The future of the agents are not just buying one agent and trying to get it to do everything, but one agent talking to another agent. There's a technology called Model Context Protocol, MCP, which is an agent-to-agent communication protocol that more and more software vendors are starting to use. So if you're using the ADP agent for payroll and you're using Galileo for some job analysis and you're using the Eightfold agent for interviewing, these things within a year, I guarantee you, they're going to be able to talk to each other and they'll be sending each other messages and you'll be able to bring these agents together as a collection of activities and a collection of applications. So there's a lot of re-engineering potential here, a lot of things you can do. And then the final thing on this is just at the high level, I think it also crosses between business functions. If you think about the way companies work, every company basically has a very similar multi-process function. There's some process of building a product or a service in R&D or in research or in product development. It comes to market, you launch it, you market it, you sell it, you support it, you collect money, you go back and try to get the customer to renew, and this cycle goes on and on and on. And what we've done in our companies is we've set up different functional areas in each one of those parts of the process: a head of research, a head of product, a head of engineering, a head of customer support, sales, marketing, et cetera. Those are all separate groups, and we optimize each one of them as if they're independent. But actually, they're not independent at all. They actually chain together. And what you'd like to know is if a customer didn't renew, you'd like to go all the way through the chain and figure out what happened, why they didn't renew, because any one of those things could be involved. And so I think, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, there's a massive change in the way we think about our businesses with AI that you have the opportunity to be involved in. The human side of this, though, as Kathy will explain to you, is much more complex than the tech. You could design this on a whiteboard, but the actual reality of doing it involves people. Employees changing roles and jobs. They're worried about their jobs, and you need to make sure they're taken care of and skilled so that they're comfortable taking on these more agent-powered responsibilities. The role of leaders, which I'll talk about in a minute, which we just recently did a big research report about, which is that if the leaders don't facilitate this change and transformation, and Kathy's going to talk more about this, you can't get people to do it on their own because they need help and they need support. The leaders, of course, are worried about their jobs because if the organization gets smaller, maybe they will lose their position. So there's that issue. And then there's the issue at the company level. Where do we focus this? What is the areas of the business we should put the most attention? Should we stop hiring everywhere or only in the areas where we have the highest cost or the best customer service, et cetera? So we've got these sort of three decision points in this. The way I think about it visually is if you think about the rate of change of technology, it's literally going vertical. Every day there's a press release from one of these vendors about something that seems spectacularly better than ever before. I think OpenAI has tripled the capacity of just their AI systems in 1 year. That never happens in technology. Yet we as individual leaders and managers cannot adapt that fast. I mean, we can't even keep track of what the stuff is, forget about figuring out how to use it and how to re-engineer our processes. And what we really see as the key here of this gap is the role of managers. You may think that all of these great AI re-engineering things are going to get done from some corporate transformation office, but actually no. I would be surprised if maybe 20% of the big AI re-engineering or 25 will come from corporate IT. A lot of it's going to come from line leaders coming up with good ideas, trying things, experimenting, building things on their own. And so that leads to this issue of management and the role that leaders and managers play in facilitating this re-engineering process. And this is not a re-engineering process like the old days where you bought a piece of software and you implemented it and then all of a sudden, poof, you were done. This is going to go on step by step, day by day, week by week over the coming years as AI evolves, because we're really re-engineering our companies to use a very, very different type of technology than we ever had before. Okay, so that's the overview. Kathy, let me turn it over to you, and Kathy will give you the secrets that we've learned on how to do this well.
Thank you, Josh. And always so fascinating to hear how you position all of these trends happening in the market. So let me talk a little bit about what we're seeing, who these pace setters are, who these winners are in the AI era and the Superworker era. And we've actually spent all year doing a lot of research. Each of these pictures that you have here is a research report on what it means to be a super worker, how it means to be a super manager, as you just said, Josh, how you get more impact with AI in HR specifically, and how AI is also transforming all of our people and talent and HR processes overall. So what does it mean? How does it actually work? How does it shape? How does AI shape our processes? And at that time, as we're looking at all of this, we discovered that there's winners and I don't want to call them losers, but maybe non-winners in the AI transformation journey. And it's of course understandable that not everybody is kind of leading the pack, but there's certainly some companies that are actually leading the pack. And so what we wanted to see is what are they doing and how are they driving that success? And this is part of our global workforce intelligence projects that we've been doing now for the last 4 years, based on data from Eightfold, actually, where we've been looking at industry by industry, the roles, the skills, the kind of career pathways that are rising and that are declining in order to support and address the biggest business problems that each of these industries have. So over the last 4 years, literally millions of data points that we've studied based on Eightfold's talent intelligence platform, how they are approaching that. So that's that. The best companies, the most successful companies, we call them pacesetters. And so while we didn't start this project, this global workforce intelligence project, as an AI, as understanding AI transformation, now, of course, we wanted to know, what are these companies doing differently to everybody else that are leading their industry? So what we're seeing is a couple of things. Well, first, as you look at skills, and this comes actually from a study from Lightcast, where they are seeing that the skills, as we're studying skills in each of these industries, are changing faster than ever. And that's not a surprise, of course, because as you see AI disrupting every job, every role, all the work that people do, skills are changing really, really fast. And you see all these statistics here, but basically this accelerating pace of skills change is really straining, I think, a lot of companies, and you probably feel this in your company too. So how can we keep up with these new skill demands all the time, and how can we help our employees keep up with these changing skills over time? At the same time, every industry is converging with another industry. And you see here actually all the industries that we've studied in the Global Workforce Intelligence Project, when we studied consumer packaged goods, pharmaceutical, healthcare delivery, banking and financial services, the insurance industry, and the automotive industry. And the way this chart goes is basically every industry is kind of transforming and overlapping and changing. And we see this not just in our own research, but the CEO studies. For example, PwC's CEO study showed that too, that all the CEOs are saying, I don't really know what industry we're in anymore. We used to be maybe a retail company, and now we have to go into financial services, and now we have to go into healthcare, or now we're a healthcare company, but of course we also need to be a tech company, or we're a banking company, but really we need to be more into insurance and cryptocurrencies and product management, on and on and on. So from a skills and from a talent model perspective, it's very challenging for us in HR and in talent and in leadership, because we used to know exactly what roles we had and what skills we needed in our companies. And now that's not clear anymore. And from a people and talent perspective, we're now competing with every other industry, not just in our own industry. So all of that is going on. So we see that these pace setters, these most successful organizations, are the top 5 to 10% of in each industry leaders that don't just lead in financial performance, but then they're also a talent leader. So they're a great place to work. They have really high Glassdoor ratings. They are recognized as a really good place to work. They're also leading their industry in kind of products or offerings or innovation for their customers. And they're also leading in their HR practices overall. So as we look at our own systemic HR practices, basically, we also evaluate them there. So this is very scientific. And we looked at all of these industries, these 6 industries, and we saw that there's a number of companies, and this is just a kind of some examples, and we'll go through some of the specifics here too, around the world, where we're seeing companies like these companies here that are leading kind of the market, and they're these pace setters. And this is all nice and good, but what we really wanted to know is, what are they doing differently, right? Because it's great to know that MetLife, for example, is one of these pace setters, but how did they get there? Or L'Oreal. So how are they doing things differently? Well, that's what we wanted to discover here, and we actually have a big report that we wrote on that, and so we'll share with you how they approach AI transformation. So as we looked at each of these industries, so we looked at all of these industries, industry by industry, and we looked at what is their biggest business problem that they have to address, and how do these pace setters, these leaders, these leading companies actually address the problem. And each of these problems was unique and different. We wrote a big report on each of them. You see the pictures here, basically, where you see, for example, in automotive manufacturing, not surprisingly, they need to transition to electric vehicles and have to have much more integrated, holistic offerings, much more kind of customer first, but much more holistic offerings as well. So from a roles and skills perspective, for example, they had to focus much less on just kind of old-fashioned manufacturing roles and much more focus on robotics, software engineering, those kind of roles. Similar story actually in consumer banking when we looked at how they could address their biggest problem, which was having a different offering on digital products, not just kind of your traditional banking offering. So they had to deploy, for example, talent intelligence to hire the right people and to find the right people, because not a lot of people with the leading tech skills actually wanted to work in old-fashioned consumer banks. So thinking about how do you use talent intelligence to hire strategically, how do you create a more holistic offering for your employees as well. CPG had a different problem. So they saw that their consumer preferences were changing and new market entrants were much more agile. So smaller CPG companies were much more agile. So they had to focus much more on R&D, for example, and go directly to consumers and not just partner with retail. So again, different problem. Healthcare, of course, has a huge talent shortage. Every time you look at the open positions, the healthcare or nursing specifically are one of the most pressured or most open positions. So what they had to do is redesign the work itself and think about how they bring in AI. Insurance, again, had kind of all of these natural disasters, for example, financial pressures. So they had to get much better at predicting risks and having much more data analytics skills and jobs. And pharmaceuticals, of course, always need to bring their treatments or their drugs to the market faster, but also manage the compliance. So again, different problems to address. But in the middle of all of these problems and how they address them was actually what we call skills velocity. So going back to this point where skills are changing so quickly, the skills velocity, this kind of really quickly identifying what skills are needed, what skills are trending, how predicting basically what skills you need for the future, and then kind of use your internal processes, your talent processes to build the right skills, to retain the right skills, to recruit the right skills at scale and with speed, basically, but then also redesign the work to the point that Josh made before, how you need to redesign the work with the AI transformation in order to leverage these new skills at scales. And so I brought up these new skills, the EV skills, for example, in automotive, the tech and AI skills in consumer banking, for example, CPG, those customer experience and design skills, the research skills, healthcare, of course, having much more AI-enabled care, telehealth, and insurance, predictive data analytics. Pharmaceuticals had the biotech skills, new R&D skills, whatever the skills are that basically are increasing in demand in your industry, really focusing on that and that kind of velocity of not just what skills you have, but how quickly as an organization you can build up the skills. As an individual, how quickly can you kind of pivot your skills? That's what really differentiates the pace setters. So how do they approach AI transformation? We clarified and we identified 6 secrets of these pace setter organizations. And you can actually download this report as well from our website if you want to read more on that. But basically we saw they're doing 6 things fundamentally different. First one is how they approach AI transformation. So AI transformation, as Josh said too, you can either think about AI as a cost control mechanism, as kind of a cost saving mechanism, or you can think about it, how can we create more products, better products, new offerings, faster go-to-market. For example, I was just at the SAP conference a couple of weeks ago, and their head of product said, we have 35,000 software developers, and we used to operate like a company with 35,000 software developers. Well, now with AI, we operate like a company with 120,000 software developers because we didn't see the AI for our software products. And of course, they're a software company. And so now he says, we're not seeing the AI as a product to help us just cut costs, but to get our products to the market much faster, with much more kind of diligence, with much more kind of consumer customer intimacy. All of that basically is possible if we see the AI for growth, not just cost control. Second one is innovating at the core. So having every employee innovate, not just having this innovation team or this R&D team. And I'm going through that, each of them actually in a little more detail. So I'll just cover them really briefly, and then we'll go into examples of how this actually works. Third thing that these pace setters do is what we call dynamic work design. So they're really thinking about what's the work that's happening, how do we need to rethink and re-engineer and reimagine the work that people do. Josh mentioned the recruiter examples or the L&D examples, but that happens in every company and in every job as well. So how can we redesign our sales jobs, our marketing jobs, our software developer jobs for the AI transformation? So pace setters do that really well. Fourth thing that they do is they focus on what we call talent density. It's really a new way of thinking about talent management. So not just adding more people when you want to grow the company, but thinking about complementary skills, team skills, kind of building that kind of talent density approach. Fifth thing that they do, and really, really important, is they support the entire change process, because AI, of course, is huge amount of change. Josh talked also how employees are really stressed about AI, and they're thinking about AI is going to take my job and maybe I shouldn't use it. Well, these pace setters actually support your employees or their employees really well with what we call change agility, a different way of thinking about change. And the last area that they do differently than others, they do what we call systemic HR. So they rethink their service delivery model, their HR operating model, their HR roles, their HR skills, all around AI. So let me talk more detail and give you some examples, because we have tons and tons of examples of that. So first area that we talked about is these pace setters use AI transformation for growth, not just for cost control. And we saw that these pace setters actually have a lot more of these kind of tech forward or like future forward technology skills in order to do that well. And you see one of these examples here on the automotive companies, but every industry, actually, we see the pace setter companies have many more of these future forward tech skills. So let me give you some examples how they do this. So first thing that they do is these pace setter companies focus their investment on AI and technology skills. And you see the example here of Moderna, and they've been in the news a lot for their AI first, also HR processes and how they combined the AI area with the HR area. But they also invested over 100 million in digital technologies to create these digital first experiences, the digital first or AI first enterprise, to really speed up their drug development and design, basically. They also are thinking about digital and AI, not just for their R&D talent, but for all employees. And their principles, their mindset is obsess over learning and digitize everywhere possible. So basically, that's kind of how they are thinking about it. So this mindset shift to invest in these AI and tech skills for every employee, not just for your technology employees, really, really important. And I know many of you probably have an AI upskilling program. And so that's what these pace setter companies do as well. Second one is transforming AI, the work basically with AI. And here's a great example of DBS, a very forward-thinking bank in Singapore. And they are completely agile in all of their processes, but they have an internal AI-powered talent marketplace that they actually developed themselves. They call it iGrow. And they use AI to integrate workforce planning, learning and development, career mobility, all of the things that you basically have with a talent marketplace. But what they're doing is they have a 40% internal fill rate for any of their positions. So 40% fill rate for all of their positions because they're using this talent marketplace. And I know this is something that many of you are maybe thinking about as well, how you can use talent marketplaces basically to create a much better work environment, but also more learning and more mentoring and more growth for your company. Another one is basically creating new revenue streams with AI. Tesla, for example, I know they are a really forward-thinking company, of course, in AI and digital and all of those kind of things. They're using AI to rewire their entire supply chain and their operational intelligence. So basically, they're using AI across the board, not just for vehicle automation, not just for self-driving cars, of course, but they are using machine learning in manufacturing. They're using dynamic pricing models, for example. They're using it for predictive maintenance of cars, basically. So that's kind of how they are thinking about it. Another great example is Zurich Insurance that have kind of also using AI to streamline their back-end operations, but then also investing in the branding, retention, talent analytics to kind of create a better employee experience and use AI, not just for efficiency, but really for people-focused and better work environments as well. So all of them, great examples of how you do this AI for growth, not just cost control. We also see that these pace setters are using AI in HR for not just efficiency, and this is actually a model that we came up with in our research on how you maximize the impact of AI in HR, not just for efficiency, but then also how can we create a better employee experience? How can we create a better outcomes, better quality of hires, for example, better learning outcomes, whatever you're doing, or better employee processes, whatever you're doing, basically. And eventually impacting every employee to be more productive. So some great examples here. Mercy Health, really big healthcare organization, uses an AI-based system they call Mercy Works on Demand to Uberize their nursing job. So they give their nurses the option to just work 5 hours a week, not 40 hours a week. And they thought first, maybe when they started this process, well, maybe everybody's going to just kind of scale down their work and we won't have enough nurses. But actually it was the opposite way, just as having this opportunity to have this kind of flexible approach to when you wanted to work was enough for them to attract more people in these nursing roles and also to retain them more. And their service levels actually didn't go down. They really went up as well. And the cost went down because they didn't have to staff up with maybe outside nurses or something like that. L'Oreal, another great example of using AI for their digital skin tools. So you could basically try out online in a virtual reality makeup products or skincare products or something like that. So they're really using AI to personalize the customer experience as well. And another one is Nestle and consumer packaged goods, of course, where they are using an AI-based chatbot for candidate questions. Many companies are using that too, but basically having candidates ask in the recruiting process, the AI chatbot, any kind of questions to create a better employee experience or candidate experience, not just to save money for the HR area. So really good way of doing that. Second one, this continuous innovation at the core. So pacesetters, they are always innovating everywhere, including frontline innovation, not just their R&D teams, their tech teams, their innovation teams, because as Josh said, the best ideas in AI transformation are going to come from your frontline. They're not going to come from your tech group. They're probably going to come from any employee that's having a great idea and saying, hey, how could we use these AI tools to kind of have a better customer experience? And those are the examples that, for example, Bayer is, and they are a very innovative company, have this kind of what they call the LEAPS initiative, where they are supporting innovation everywhere, and they have competitions on AI use and innovations and all of that. Frontline innovation, Toyota is one of the most forward-thinking companies in that front, and they are even expanding that not just for their own employees, for the payrolled employees, but to their 40 or 50% of their company that's actually contractors or contingent workers, where they're having really fast prototyping, lean manufacturing, all of those kind of things, applying that across the board to frontline teams, manufacturing teams, all of that. And also innovating, investing in innovation capabilities, in innovation skills. And you see here actually the multipliers, how much more innovation skills pacesetter pharmaceutical companies, for example, have. So really focusing on supporting these innovation skills. Advent Health is a great example of using AI to reimagine what they call whole person care in the healthcare setting. So just some really good examples of tapping every employee to innovate and transform the company. Okay, third one has to do with how you redesign the work, the jobs, and the roles of every person and around the company. Josh mentioned that too. Of course, if work and roles and jobs change so quickly, how do we have this both bottom-up approach, but then also the top-down approach, where we are maybe looking at where's the biggest opportunity to use AI and then support that kind of innovation and role redesign. So those pacesetters organization really redesign all of their jobs and their roles to make work more meaningful, to have people be these super workers, these much more productive people, and really incorporate AI into all the workflows, I should say, all the processes, not just looking at kind of tasks, but really thinking about what's the outcome of any job that we have, and then working back on that. Really good examples here from healthcare organization Providence, for example. They are thinking about how they're using AI to redesign all of their clinical roles as well, and really focusing on what they call top of license patient care. So having every nurse, for example, just do the work that they are uniquely qualified for, so that the patient outcomes are just much better. And AI can take some of the more mundane work, like taking notes, for example, patient notes or other things, and also direct the nurses and their clinical people to the cases where they have the highest need. So using AI for all of that. ING has really another really forward-thinking bank, has been doing agile work teams for a number of years, really breaking down all of these boundaries, as Josh mentioned too, where AI can bring together your sales team, your marketing team, your kind of consumer team, your product team, your tech teams, in these agile kind of squads, and use technology to do all of that. And Toyota having 40% of their workforce contingent, thinking about the entire workforce, so that they can focus on kind of these future forward skills and have that skills velocity. So redesigning work is one of the number one processes and number one approaches. And we saw this also in our healthcare study, where we saw that actually redesigning the work with AI and other means is the biggest area where healthcare organizations can actually close the big nursing gap that they have. So at the same time, of course, you need to still recruit the right nurses in this case, and retain the people that they already have, and reskill maybe people from declining professions into these future forward roles. But the biggest opportunity comes from this work redesign. So we saw this already in our healthcare study as well that we did a few years ago. Okay, fourth one has to do with talent density. So a new approach basically to think about complementary skills, the skills velocity, not just jobs. And the job model, of course, is an industrial model where we think every person needs to fit into these jobs, and your job architecture has this really complicated construct. When somebody leaves, basically you try to match another person to that job. But in the meantime, of course, because skills and work are changing so quickly, kind of the job architecture is already obsolete. So the pacesetters are really thinking about this from a people perspective, from a skills perspective, and then they say the job model is almost obsolete, or becomes secondary with that. So they're using talent intelligence to see the skills that they have, the skills that are in the outside market, and also then match people to the right skills. And actually, I see questions. I'll stop here because I'd love to address them as we go along. I see a great question from Shelley, actually, from on the previous topic where we talked about redesigning work. How does one get started redesigning the work? Excellent question, because of course there's so many jobs that you can prioritize in redesigning, and where do you start redesigning? And we always say to our clients and to the market, start either with the pain or start with the gain. So basically the pain is, where do you have a big business problem? Where do you have, for example, performance? Maybe your salespeople are not selling enough, or maybe you have too many marketing people, or maybe you have your software engineers not developing enough product. So that would be starting with the pain, whether you have the biggest business problem, or you're starting with the gain. Where's the biggest upside, basically? Where do you see people or groups, basically jobs, contributing most to your financial performance, to your customer satisfaction, your customer results? And that is not one size fits all, of course. So depending on who your organization is, where you're in the growth cycle, that's where you could prioritize where you start redesigning the work, and then basically get insights on what work people are doing, how your AI can support all of that work. That's why, for example, healthcare organizations a lot of times start with their clinical profession, because of course the clinical profession is closest to the customer, but then also they have huge talent gaps in that area. So it really depends on who you are as a company, where you start with that, but always start thinking about what's the problem you can solve with that, rather than seeing this as a big infrastructure project. And that also applies to this skills conversation, where you're thinking about not just getting this big inventory of skills, but really think about how can you hire for the right skills, as Scotiabank, for example, did when they doing skills assessment for campus recruiting rather than resumes. And it totally makes sense, because when you think about campus recruiting, most of your college graduates or college students don't really have a lot of resumes. So thinking about what skills do they have, what transferable skills do they have from maybe their internships or whatever they're doing. So thinking about skills rather than resumes, and lots of other examples, of course, too, of skill-based assessments using AI, lots of case studies on that as well. Thinking about internal mobility as well. So when you're thinking about what are the skills that we need to build, and how do we build these talent-dense organizations, these maybe even smaller organizations where every employee kind of counts and has so much more value to the team. Bon Secours Mercy Health, for example, is using AI to think about career pathways and internal mobility products to go into kind of nursing jobs from maybe, because that's where they have the biggest talent shortage, from maybe receptionists, for example, or maybe from cleaning people or like environmental services people, and building these career pathways, upskilling people internally, helping people get a nursing degree, for example, all of those kind of internal mobility products and process is really important. And thinking about what are adjacent skills. BNY Mellon, for example, found that they already had people in their tech roles because they needed to have really like next generation technology skills, and they had people with adjacent skills. Maybe they didn't have the exact right technology skills, but maybe they knew already some of the software products or some of the technology development languages. And so then once they saw what skills people have, then they could move people around and help them get projects and get mentors and move people into these tech roles that they couldn't hire to begin with anyway, because not a lot of people wanted to maybe work in the bank, and they could work maybe in software companies. So all great processes. We're also thinking about dynamic skilling. And so basically, how can you think about what skills you need? And with this skills velocity, this building the skills that you need in the future really quickly, closing these skill gaps dynamically. Coca-Cola Euro-Pacific Partners, for example, a really great example of using talent intelligence and they call this a career co-pilot. So basically every employee can see what are my skills, how can my skills map into what new future career opportunities could I have, and then they get these career suggestions, and at the same time Coca-Cola themselves can fill these kind of skills needs that they have and that they have identified with that skills velocity. Always focusing on upskilling. That's another thing that these pace setters do. So L'Oreal, for example, is dedicating over 100 million euro every year on upskilling, and they have capability academies, really good ways of thinking about and clustering basically in their capability academies the learning together for people and helping them kind of build these next generation skills really, really quickly. And then at the same time, also thinking about skills adjacencies. Another great one is Bayer, for example. They are using a talent marketplace as well to move people around dynamically based on the skills that they have and that they're adjacent to other skills as well. Okay, next one, fifth secret that these pace setters do differently. So they have, of course, change is huge in the AI transformation, and we know that employees are stressed about it. Employees are kind of scared of AI taking their job or AI moving so fast. What the pace setter organizations do, they think about change agility. So they're not just thinking about kind of how can we manage the change, like when you used to maybe you had to implement a new ERP system, for example. It was all about change management. So you said, well, when is our due date? When is our launch date? We communicated, we trained people, we managed this as a project. So it was all about project management. Then you implemented that new system, and then people were through it, and then like, whew, now we can go back to working normally. But that doesn't work anymore because, as Josh said too, every day AI changes all the time. So rather than doing this like legacy big process of change management, top-down change management, focusing on this bottom-up kind of employee-driven change agility approach where you have maybe focus groups, maybe you have kind of communities of practice, or maybe you have discussion groups, or maybe you have hackathons, or maybe you have kind of like sharing of best practices of how you're using the AI tools and tapping into that. Also, the super manager actually fits into that as well. How can you leverage every line manager, not just basically having this as a top-down, really overblown process. And like leadership really is important that too. ING, for example, has this approach of agile leadership, always thinking about how can we collaborate across the organization for customer outcomes, focusing, also prioritizing change skills, change roles, using analytics, predictive analytics to always prioritize for what, for example, new patient needs would come about. So all of these are great examples of thinking about change management, not just in this old-fashioned way, but in this human-centered, continuous, bottom-up kind of way as well. Analytics, really, really important here as well. So when you want to do change agility, you need to know what the trends are. You need to always think about how can you connect business data with workforce data in order to create better outcomes, to create better transformation outcomes. So Toyota, for example, a great example of using data across their entire workforce to drive innovation in their manufacturing processes and other processes as well. Providence is integrating data on the employees, for example, survey data, compensation data, turnover data, so employee data with patient care data to see what are the processes, what are the examples, how can we strengthen the people processes that create better patient outcomes, because eventually, of course, you want to drive to, if you're a healthcare organization, have healthier patients and better processes there as well. And the last area is rethinking your entire HR operating approach and the HR service delivery model. And these pace setters really think about HR as a problem-solving discipline, not a service delivery discipline. So it's a complete mindset shift. that we call systemic HR as well, where we say, how can you focus on falling in love with the problem? How can you focus on predicting what workforce needs we'd have, as Bon Secure Mercy, for example, is doing when they are doing workforce planning, org design, coaching, all based on data, and then really aligning their people processes with where the biggest needs are. Breaking down HR silos. So rather than thinking about your recruiting team, your learning team, your compensation team, thinking about this in a more systemic way, as Unilever, for example, is doing, all with a focus on a better employee experience, not just on HR service delivery. And using AI in HR really strategically. This company, Mahindra and Mahindra, they're an automotive company in India, and they are using the AI systems, for example, AI kind of agents, to create better employee services, but then also create a better employee experience, and not just save money for the HR organization, but focus on manager effectiveness and employee experience solutions as well. Well, all of this boils down to what we call the 4R framework, where you're bringing together around this skills velocity, all the different practices of HR, when you're at the same time recruiting, of course, for the skills that you need, but at the same time also thinking about how can we create a better employee experience, more diversity, better compensation solutions, whatever it is, to retain the people that we already have in this area. At the same time also thinking about how can we reskill, how can we create career pathways, skills programs, adjacencies, all of that. And at the same time, redesign job, work, and employment models with AI and around AI to create what we call top of license approaches. And the last area actually that we also wanted to call out for, these pace setters also rethink the role of the CHRO. We were just, Josh and I were just, and our team were just at the Unleash conference last week in Paris, and we saw a lot of discussions on CHRO roles and CHROs really changing their roles altogether, and companies actually redesigning the CHRO role, expanding that. Great examples we have here, for example, on Standard Chartered Bank, where their CHRO, Tanush, she leads HR, but then also strategy, transformation, and all the corporate functions, or Moderna as well, where Tracy, their CHRO, leads the digital team, but also the HR function. Lots of examples of this CHRO role really expanding here as well. So how do you think about that? How do you get started with this? Well, here's some things to do. Well, first, think about this skills velocity, not just skills depth. So really think about how are skills changing, and how can we, as an organization, support people to have this kind of skills velocity approach. Then think about how are you doing on these 6 strategies, on these 6 processes that we mentioned that the pace setters are doing, and where do you want to get started? Incorporate these pace setter secrets into your AI transformation, and then always rethink your organizational and your talent strategies and your practices, because AI is changing all the time, and so we always have to think about also how are we changing that. Bottom line of all of this is your role is really more important than ever in HR, whether you're in HR or in talent acquisition or in learning and development or HR business partners. This is our time in the sun, as I think Nicole Lamoureux called it, the CHRO of IBM. She said, this is our time in the sun. So how do you think about your role? How do you step up in this AI transformation and really take this leadership role? Because if work is changing, if roles are changing, if skills are changing, this is our time to really make a big impact. So with that, let's see if we have any other questions. And I was monitoring the chat, but if you have any other questions, please put them in the chat. I think we have maybe another minute or so. And if we don't, then I think we'll hand it over back to you, Amberly, or if you have one more thing to think about. one more minute to think about. And otherwise, we'll hand it back over to you, Amberly, to wrap us up.
Thank you all so much for attending today's webinar. You may disconnect and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much, and thanks for listening in.